Let's get going. Thank you for joining us. Excited to be a part of this today. This is the fishbowl, and I don't know why I decided to call it that, but it was a good idea at the time, so we'll just stick with it. I am lucky enough to have collaborated with all the panelists here for the last couple of years in some really interesting endeavors. And I did the math before I introduced them all. And I think there's a little over 100 years of IT experience on this panel. So yeah, if the topics sound old, it's not that they're old, it's just that the people who are doing it are old. And I think I'm the oldest if I'm not mistaken. If you do it in internet years, I think it's like 500 internet years of experience. Isn't it like 4.7 to 1 or something? My name is Curtis Blais. I'm the Shared Chief Information Security Officer through Alberta's premier technology accelerator, Cybera. If you can just look over my shoulder and see the Cybera cup right there. Yeah, that's it. They cater to the higher learning space, K-12s, and some other public sector organizations. I have a little over 30 years experience in IT, and we were all kind of jostling around going, I'm not sure I want to say exactly how long I've been in IT, but I'll introduce the rest of the panel. We'll start with Mark. Mark leads the cybersecurity operations, governance, risk, compliance, and if that's not enough, architecture teams at the University of Calgary. And Mark brings us 20 plus. He didn't tell me exactly how many years. Mark, good to have you. Next, with over 25 years of experience, another one who wouldn't give me the exact number, but 25 plus in IT and IT security, Rob leads the security charge at Southern Alberta Institute of Technology. That's SAIT through the implementation of governance, control frameworks, policies, procedures, extensive vulnerability management, security awareness, and phishing programs. Rob, Sir Rob, good to have you.
Thanks, Curtis.
I think I just knighted you. I don't know if I'm allowed to, but I think I just did. I do have a sword right here. I could pull it out if you want. Next, Frank. Frank brings over 20 years of practice in various disciplines of IT, but now focused primarily on cybersecurity and risk management as the Director of IT Infrastructure and Security at Mount Royal University in Calgary. Frank, good to have you. And last but certainly not least, a fellow Edmontonian with more than 20 years of involvement in the IT space, much of this in the software development space. Charles is currently the Chief Information Security Officer at MacEwan University in Edmonton. Most of Charles's experience to date has been in the private sector, but in the last 6 years or so, he moved into the higher education space. And I'm sure he's glad he did that. Charles, glad you were able to join us.
Thanks, Curtis.
All right, here's what we're going to do. We got 4 topics. Like to chat about all of them. And what we'll do is I'll be watching the chat. So if you have questions about the specific questions that we're talking about, feel free to pop them in there. And after each one, we'll stop and we'll try and address questions. So the 4 questions are, number 1, protecting advanced education. Number 2, academic freedom versus cybersecurity, friends or foes. Number 3, centralized versus decentralized IT. And then number 4, security technologies. So each panelist will have an opportunity to chime in. We'll chat about the subjects, maybe even get a little dialogue going, and then answer questions, and we'll see how far we get. All right, let's get started with topic number 1, protecting advanced education. In a recent insurance industry report, it was noted that the most targeted security sector for cybersecurity attacks is the advanced education space because they're information rich. They have student records, staff records, faculty information, as well as, at times, leading edge research and data of a wide variety of disciplines. So the question, and we'll start with you, Rob, is, well, what makes it so challenging to secure an advanced education environment?
I was thinking a lot about this one, and really the best way to give an analogy of it is it's like running a small city. We have literally everything. We have restaurants, we have hotel spaces, we have thousands of students, we have staff here, we have, like you said, research data. There's literally everything and anything you can think of, and we're also dealing with instructors who are cutting edge and want to do the latest, greatest thing, right? As well as the fact that we teach students here at SAIT anyways, how to write malware, how to write rootkits, and so we have to make sure that we're, keeping that all protected. So it's an interesting and challenging environment to be in for sure. I mean, I spent over 20 years consulting the oil and gas industry here in Calgary, and I told the CIO when I came here, I said, you did not prepare me for higher ed. Higher ed has definitely been an interesting challenge for me in my career, and I love it. It's fun. It's because things are always changing, but it is tough to secure. That's for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like the enemy within, Rob, the way you described it. Mark, is it the same for you? How do you think? What's so difficult about securing advanced ed?
Sure, yeah, I can add on to the great comments there from Rob. So, when considering IT security, there are like huge additional costs to projects and technology implementations, and sometimes that's a hard bite in taxpayer-funded institutions. And just to add to what Rob was saying, we do scale to the size of small cities, and we have it all, like health data on my side. We have health data just add to the list that Rob was talking about, that personally identifiable information and the health level. So identity management is key to that success and supporting that. And universities are really a big data security problem. Like on average, like I've talked to some of the U15 people, and the U15 is the top 15 universities in Canada in terms of size. And University of Calgary is in there. And, we have about 80 identity types and about 80,000 different accounts that people log in with. That's human accounts that people log in with. And we have over 44 petabytes of storage that we, people use and support and do research with on campus. And it's crazy when you compare that to oil and gas companies that I worked at many years before as well. And but you're kind of finding that advanced education, like other industries before it, is starting to experience that increase in external scrutiny. And we're starting to have external audits, and we're starting to have funding protection reviews and regulatory scrutiny, and it's starting to come around. And I think the new expectation that is repeated is these audit failures, if there's audit failures at your institutions, or identified information security breaches, situations that will ultimately lead to the loss of funding if we don't start to fund security and advanced education more. And just the general funding amount for security and per device in institutions is lower. And the key is to get that leadership buy-in and help people understand the facts of what's actually happening out there in your threat landscape. And we don't scale to just one use case at universities. We have multiple use cases. This person wants to run a virus lab over here, and this person wants to share health data with the University of Toronto over there, and then this person wants to research rats and what happens if somebody feeds them from pushing a button on an internet. And use cases are vast. And so, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what gets lost in that, and most people maybe not even realize, is that universities of that nature are dealing with organizations like NASA, and I mean like all kinds of data, and so you could see where it'd be a pretty rich target. Frank, same thing for you. What do you think? What's the biggest challenge?
Obviously, Rob and Mark have covered a lot of terrain there. I think one of our challenges, obviously, is we have a very large dynamic user environment. So identity and access management is very important. Users are our targets. Like phishing campaigns are very effective when you have tens of thousands of users you can target. We're, as a university, you are an open environment. I mean, anybody can walk into the campus, start dropping USB sticks everywhere, and see where that goes. Research environments, a lot of intellectual property, that's very important. I mean, that's probably more relevant to Mark's institution. They do a lot of cutting edge research there. So that's our challenge. We're very open, and we need to be.
Open by design, but makes you vulnerable at the same time. Hey, I think that rhymed. Charles, same for you. What would you say?
Yeah, pretty much. I would probably expand on some of the sentiments that these guys said. I think our broad user base is a constant challenge, and it's not that we just have 20 to 70,000 users, it's those users have all different types of affiliations to our university, and they all need some sort of system access, right? So you have users that are normal staff and faculty. You have people who just applied to the university, still need some sort of access. You have undergrad students, continuing education, and like extension study students who've only signed up for a $100 course, still need a user account and some sort of access, right? And then you have like graduate students at a really big university, or maybe you have visiting researchers that actually need accounts. We call them research affiliates at MacEwan. And all of these different roles can overlap too. You, of course, have staff that are also students, and students that are casual staff in your sport and wellness area, right? So yeah, I would sort of highlight the identity and access management challenges are huge, right? Because all of these people need some sort of access to your infrastructure. And every time you implement a security control, you have to think about how it affects all of these different user types. Right?
Very cool. Yeah. I mean, just the sheer size, I can only imagine just adding up how many people we're talking about, just in the institutions that are represented here. It's really big. I mean, we're talking at the level of, as Mark mentioned, cities. So I was checking the questions. Now, I noticed, Angela, you noted something about faculties wanting to do things their own way. That's one of our questions, actually. So if it's okay, we'll wait till we get to that, and we'll maybe address that then. I don't see anything more. So why don't we jump to the second subject? Academic freedom versus cybersecurity. I think we've all seen in the news over the last few months the idea of academic freedom and freedom of speech. Is there a similar scenario between the idea of academic freedom and cybersecurity? Are they friends, foes? Mark, what do you figure?
So yeah, the ever-going battle of let me do what I want. Hold on, you need to be secure. But educational institutions traditionally thrive on their unique ability to teach and perform and research in a quick and effective manner. And it is a key element that kind of drives the funding and the success for the institution. That's how they get grants and things like that. And at times, it is perceived as an imposition of information technology security. On top of that, research is sometimes considered unsupportable or detrimental to the research process if you stick it in there. And there's many cases where unfortunately it's left out, and I've heard about it at other institutions and experienced it myself too. It leaves that research vulnerable and to compromise. And so, and really where universities were previously less likely to be attacked, they are increasingly targets to these new threat actors that, are finding it sometimes easy to get in and trick these people with phishing attacks and things like that. And universities are really referred to as whales in the Black Hat community, large universities, and they're big targets. And so the increase in state actor interest in our intellectual property, and it could be quickly monetized. And so really what needs to happen here with the relationship, I'll tie this back here now. Really what needs to happen to the relationship is we need to pivot to a relationship from checkbox compliance and shift to risk-based decision-making. And what that's going to do is that's going to help the relationship so that we're not saying, you have to do these 10 things. And it's like, wait, maybe you only need to do these things because of your data classification or how you're operating or where you're doing it in the cloud. And so really, to finish it off, we need to recognize that information technology security is not an imposition on academic freedom, but it is an indicator of academic excellence going forward. And it's our job as security professionals at institutions, and if there's any others who are watching us here, we need to bolster that relationship and work with them. And my advice is to watch the checkbox compliance and help them understand the risk and help them address their risks with proper controls or processes.
That's interesting, Mark. I heard you say friends, obviously, and I expected that from a security professional. Charles, you see it the same way?
Yeah, I do. One of the things, it's that balance is the really hard thing to strike between security and efficiency and exploration and everything that comes with academic freedom, right? And I think another thing that's challenging for us is that basically just slows everything down, right? Because it involves so much more collaboration and communication and on all of the work that you're trying to do to secure the institution, right? One interesting twist to something like academic freedom is that it often means that faculty retain the intellectual property rights to all of their data, which means that when we're protecting our institution's data, we're not even necessarily protecting our data we own, right? And that's why consultation becomes so huge in order to get anything done, right? And then with that comes lots of devices that aren't managed by the university because, of course, they have the freedom to buy them under their own grants, right? So it's just every step along the way, you have to take a step back and look at how cybersecurity can be done in a more consultative and risk-based process. It's not a perfect science, right?
I heard you say two things, like the idea of custodianship of data. In some ways you're the custodian because you run the infrastructure and your job is to protect all that data that you're custodian of. But on the other side, and even Mark talked about this, about research grants and money and the researchers and how it all belongs to them. I'm wondering if, tying, if the research funders themselves sort of got involved and said, you got to follow good security practices, or we're not giving you money to do this kind of research. I wonder if that would make a difference. I didn't mean to lead you that way, Rob, but what do you think?
Well, I agree. I think, so a lot of stuff that Charles said, even in his other talk too, as well, about the collaboration that's required to do things like simple things like implementing MFA across the institution are painful sometimes because of just some of the things that you have to consider when it comes to working with the faculty and the students and everything like that. And it's definitely a balancing act for sure. It's something that I talk about quite often with our management team and a lot of other people too as well. Is security is really a balancing act, and it has to be, right. It's about enabling the institution to do what they want to do, but do it securely. And it's a constant struggle that you're always selling and marketing what it is that you want to do and how to secure things. And sometimes you have to make concessions too as well and figure out, other ways to make sure that things maintain their security, because it's just a constant switch back and forth between this and that and who wants to access this, who wants to access that. We had a big battle years ago about local admin on desktops, right? It's like, those things just keep coming at you all the time, and it's accelerated with the adoption of the cloud and everything like that we're seeing happening now too as well.
While you were talking, I'm thinking, I was looking up to see if I could register the name Tightrope Security, because that's what it sounds like. You're walking on a tightrope the whole time.
Yeah.
Frank, what your experience here? What do you think?
Yeah, certainly, researchers and faculty, security is not always top of mind. They really focus on their research and what they're teaching, and it's up to us. It's up to us to have the discussion to bring that into context. And I'm sure they're very interested in protecting their IP, especially if they're researchers. So yeah, it's about consulting and discussing the risk and come up to that arrangement that satisfies both sides.
It sounds like that give and take a little, and I'm wondering if we really do we get that? Is it come that way? There's a good question actually. Angelo asked about Canada's Bill C-11, so that's a kind of the new privacy bill. And when you asked that, Angelo, I was wondering if initially that was there's a Quebec legislation too they're saying is similar to GDPR that may affect those who do business with Quebec. So anybody want to jump in around privacy and how that may affect cybersecurity programs?
Yeah, I can jump in. Privacy legislation is something that we deal with all the time. We deal with the Health Information Act, as Mark mentioned, FOIP here in Alberta, GDPR for any of our students that are based in the European Union. So there's a lot of different privacy legislations that are coming. California recently enacted one that is actually a lot more restrictive, and I'm expecting to see more and more of that. And so it's stuff that we deal with all the time. And so this new C-11 privacy bill that's coming is just going to be another one that we just have to consider when we're doing things. We spend a lot of time on our team just talking about privacy and information and you know, if we're doing the right thing when it comes to all the stuff that we're trying to protect.
Anybody else? Okay. Stephen made an interesting comment in there. When people their information patents are at risk, it's an easier conversation. You guys find that if they're looking at their data and going, your data's at risk, do they listen to that?
Yeah, they do.
Of course, they do.
Comment on this one. Yeah, no, they do listen, and you know, there's organizations like ISED and things out there that are giving that grant funding for nationally in Canada to researchers and things like that, and they just released in July that people have to perform a risk assessment based on the type of information they're working with. And so to your earlier comment, Curtis, about like, are the national organizations who are giving the granting funding actually starting to require cybersecurity? And the answer is yes. And it's starting, and there's 5 requirements for ISET from a cybersecurity perspective. And a lot of it actually says to work with your cybersecurity department at your institution, which is great, because that makes sense, because we're responsible and accountable for the confidentiality and integrity and availability for all the data that resides on our network and our systems that our researchers work with. So, you know, having them come in and talk to us and having that oversight and support really helps and really drives that message home to researchers that work with us, because we're going to be flexible with you and, you know, take that risk-based approach like I was talking about earlier.
Very cool. Anybody else jump in on that? Alrighty, I think we got all the questions. So let's move to topic number 3. And this was hinted at a little earlier: centralized versus decentralized IT. The reality in many large institutions is that there are multiple ID departments with shadow IT in nearly every corner. We know this is kind of contradictory to good practice in IT governance, which is where central IT is where things can be managed and secured in a kind of consistent manner. Not to mention the cost savings of infrastructure and some of the benefits you get from bringing some of the technology together and being able to support them. So the question is, how big of an issue is decentralized IT and as it relates to cyber exposure? Charles, what do you think?
I think it's an interesting question. I think it is a big issue, and it's not always in the way that you typically think about it. The organization that I'm at, McEwen, we consider ourselves centralized IT. So we don't see a lot of issues with shadow IT in faculties. There's a little bit of an IT presence in the library and comp sci faculty, but we work together and it works. Where I actually see this at McEwen is with our non-academic departments, like facilities for their building control systems and door lock systems, or our campus services where they have food vendors and parking, all doing different types of payment processing, right? And, you know, as Mark's alluded to before, it's difficult getting, you know, proper funding in IT in higher ed. And this leads to smaller teams. And when these different business areas are bringing on these new solutions, not enough IT involvement, or what I see happening at my own institution is a lot of vendor managed arrangements for IT solutions. And so you end up having decentralized IT, not even out from your faculties, right? Or you're having to rope in vendors who are not patching systems. So, you know, and I admit that probably that decentralization that's happening at McEwen is probably because we don't have a mature enough set of standards developed to make sure that those business areas are following suit. But, you know, it is a challenge for sure because of the size we are and what we're dealing with for resourcing.
Frank, you have a similar situation at MRU?
Yeah, obviously we're very similar to McEwen here at MRU, a similar size, and we do have the same setup. We do have a centralized IT setup, which I think for our size of university is ideal. I think you have a bit more control. Somebody put a question in there. Does everybody use the same network? So in our case, we do. So we do control the whole network environment. There are some small IT pockets outside of central IT, similar to Charles. Library, which has a fair amount of technology in there, has some IT players there. CompSci, same type of thing. We do need to work with vendors. Vendors bring in their own environment, much like Charles. Also, the IoT in facility management is becoming bigger and bigger. So there's external vendors involved. So we just got to make sure that things are done to our standard and it doesn't affect the security of our environment. But I assume Mark will have a very different story than both of us, as he's substantially bigger and has a lot more complex environment.
Well, Mark, he just teed it up for you. You don't need me.
Yeah, set me up for success there, Frank. So, yeah, the University of Calgary are larger, and a lot of larger universities across Canada actually they're more decentralized than the University of Calgary. So our previous VPFS, Linda Belgrady, was a great leader, and she helped centralize IT at the University of Calgary, and it really did create a lot of efficiencies. But we do still have other IT. We actually don't call them shadow IT anymore. The University of Calgary, we call them other IT, whatever you want to call them. But
they're out of the shadows.
We see them as partners. But really, like on a campus like ours and other larger ones across Canada, we have every imaginable combination of hardware and software that is employed in the university setting, right? And the management of that technology is often decentralized, including like technology, operational, and security components. And so, just imagining the technical and security debt out there because of that, because usually in a decentralized scenario, not everyone will follow the same framework or governance or have the same IT general controls and practices to ensure that they're operating effectively and securely, which will ultimately, in my opinion, lead to higher costs in your educational institution and potentially a breach. Because if the one party is not taking cybersecurity seriously, and they believe that they are secure for some reason, and they're going to have some sort of gap without an analysis, and it's going to lead to a breach. And really, governance is an answer. I'm not going to say the only answer, but it is an answer. And that top-down leadership driving for the efficiencies of central services. Another thing that really comes up in decentralized and centralized IT departments across universities is the attestation of compliance for certain researchers and research faculties that they have to do, and it's challenging to complete when not all parties at your entity are on the same page for the framework and standards that they're following. And the other thing that happens is, everybody kind of touched on it about having software vendors and people buying software. It's really that third-party risk is a reality for all of our organizations, right? And at a university, we review hundreds of software acquisitions requests, and that's that governance model of driving that into so that you have a proper threat risk assessment, a privacy impact assessment, those kinds of things. And that can limit the supply chain attacks that you inevitably are going to have, and everybody is having out there right now, unfortunately, due to your integrations. And that those third-party risk assessments and having that centralized governance, that's key to protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your data at your institution again. And so in order to deliver a robust environment, universities need to enable IT security management function that is centralized, robust, and they need to be flexible. And they have to consider the diverse nature of the operations at university, and whether you're centralized or decentralized, having that central cybersecurity function, I think, is key, that governance of how everybody needs to operate there.
Thanks, Mark. And sorry for interrupting. In a private sector setting, I saw this, and well, not quite private, it was kind of private, but an auditor actually solved the problem of shadow IT basically by walking in and saying, listen, if you're going to do IT and you're going to do IT, I'm bringing all the controls to you, and you both better pass. And as soon as that happened, IT became centralized. Rob, was this your experience? Anything like that? Or what's it like at SAIT?
Ours was very similar to Mark's story. So we were completely decentralized in 2018. We had 8 schools here at SAIT, and we had 8 IT departments, 8 help desks, and it really became a budgetary problem. It was, how are we paying for all of these separate common services across the institution? And so the decision was made in 2018 to centralize. And we're just, we're at a point now where we're kind of settled from that huge change to the organization, and it's brought a lot of benefits. We obviously have one single help desk now, so all staff and all students can come to one place, and it's been good that way. And it's also allowed us to do things, I think, a little bit better when it comes to security, for sure, because we know the whole stack now for the entire institution. Spent a lot of time, in my previous days, running around to different schools and just trying to get my controls in there, because I knew that we're going to get audited, or someone's going to look at us, or something bad was going to happen, right? And I did not want to. That's one of the main things that we always talk about, is we want to stay out of the news, right, for any bad reasons. And that's that was pretty much the whole job when we were decentralized. But now it's a little better, because now we have, like Frank mentioned, a set of common controls and standards, third-party risk assessments, that kind of stuff. And I think today, we're pretty good, but we still have people pressuring us to do shadow IT. We still call it shadow IT here, for sure, but it's the cloud really that's driving that, right? It's so easy for a school to just say, we want to do something, and talk to a vendor and stand up something in the cloud, and next thing you know, SAIT is out there, and we're trying to figure out whether or not they put any controls in place on that service, or what data that they've moved out to the cloud, or anything like that too. So it's always a challenge, for sure. It's something you can't let your foot off the gas. You have to be constantly striving to make sure that everything is maintained in a central way.
Yeah, I was going to say, SaaS has empowered shadow IT, because all you need is a credit card, and you can sign up, and then there's data going. And so, does anybody want to talk about SaaS and their experience with SaaS? Like, is there something you're doing to try and minimize that, or?
Well, I think we're probably all doing, like Mark said, and Rob, we're doing threat, whether it's a technology risk assessment, or we call it a privacy and security assessment, we're doing centralized assessments. But staying on top of them is really tough, right? Because once you centralize that function and you have that central governance, you have them coming from all over the place. And nobody wants to take the time to slow down for us to look at the privacy impacts or the security impacts of that SaaS service, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I think for us, we put financial controls in place, so it stops at the purchasing department. People can't buy stuff. But what we see happening is that, like you said, Curtis, they use their credit card and buy something, right? And that's something that purchasing doesn't see right now today. So it is hard to stop it completely, for sure.
Actually, I've been working with an institution who actually just recently put in controls at the credit card layer, where you cannot buy software on a credit card, because they were having the same problem, right? And so, and I guess that was my kind of comment, you, Charles. I mean, when you know about it, you can do the assessment. It's when you go, what? Yeah. You're using what? Right? And you find out after.
Or when you find out they need it next week, right? Because the session's opening up.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's one interesting thing about universities. Maybe not just universities, but everywhere, is it's always, I need it right now, and so that's kind of where you gotta. Well, at least we do it, is we tie it back to data classification, which was set by legal and privacy. And then when you kind of have that governance model in there, where people have to follow certain standards based on the data classification they're working with, like we try to have some sort of ISO compliance or SOC 2 Type 2 compliance for all SaaS providers before you use them with our level 3, level 4 data, which is our confidential and health information data. And it does slow people down, and it is frustrating at times, but it comes back to that resourcing challenge. And how do you get self-attestation on threat risk assessments? Is something that should be on a roadmap, I think, and helping people understand the risk.
Great. All right. I don't see any more questions specifically about this subject, so let's move on to our fourth and hopefully final, because we had a spare question, but hopefully we don't have to go there. Security technologies. It seems like every day a new company shows up on the landscape with a different twist on some sort of cybersecurity product. What one cybersecurity technology would you say makes the biggest difference in your ability to provide security to your institution? Something old, or something new, or something borrowed, or something blue? I don't know. There was a saying about that. Frank, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll address both there. Something old and something new. Something old, maybe something current. I would say what would affect or improve our security posture the most right now is implementing MFA across the board, across all faculty, all staff, and all students. It's a big project. We're kind of on our way. I mean, obviously, with our very large user base, that's a lot of targets. When we do our phishing exercise every quarter, there's an unfortunately large number of people that click on the links. So certainly MFA will certainly improve on minimizing those issues. From more of a something new perspective, I would look at the XDR technology, the SIM-SOAR type of technology, like technology that kind of like aggregates all kind of like the data from multiple data sources from your environment, and then hopefully provide some automation and some orchestration from an incident response perspective. I did see a great presentation from FireEye and Mandiant just before this regarding XDR. It's quite interesting. I look at the XDR is fairly new. I look at the vendors like we have Sophos EDR on our platform, and they're upgrading us to Sophos XDR. But that only means that we could put Sophos firewall information and what's the other one? Sophos email gateway. So integration with other technology it might be limited or complicated to do. I think one of the great slides that I liked in the previous presentation was is XDR made up? It's a made up term by vendors to sell more products. I thought that was funny. But I think it's great technology, hopefully, to bring effectiveness in our detection and response. And for us, we have a pretty good SIM environment, so maybe to add the SOAR capabilities to that, to add orchestration and automation to what comes out of the SIM would be a pretty good advantage.
For those of us who are long in the tooth in the security space, you hear a term like that and you're thinking snake oil. You always got, one eye open a little at me. And the guys, I was in that session a little bit too, and the guys did a good job describing, kind of the description of XDR. I like to think of it as threat intelligence fed security layered solutions. Like, to me, that's, and with some automation built in. It's probably easier to say XDR. Rob, what do you think? Something old, something new? What would you say the best technology?
Oh, man. I hope there's no vendors on the call. I heard the other day that there's over 900 different security products out there and vendors right now. And to be honest with you, I have most of them on permanent ignore when they're contacting me, because it is constant. I honestly get, probably 50 LinkedIn invitations, a week. I get hundreds of emails from cold call vendors and stuff like that with new snake oil. That I unfortunately, that's what I call it. And what I'm a big believer in is maximizing the use of what you have in place already. I used to, way back in my career, I worked for a managed security provider, and we did SIM management, security identity and information, and we discovered that most organizations only use about 20% of their SIM's capabilities when they deploy them. They buy them, they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on them, and they roll them out, and then they just call, well, we got a SIM, so we're good. And they don't invest the rest of the time and money in it. So when I got into the industry and started working as a leader in there, that's one of the things that I focus on, is maximizing the use of the technology that we have in place. So we have a SIM, we have vulnerability management, We have XDR2 as well in place here, and my mandate to my team is let's just make sure we're using it to the best of its abilities before we look at anything else that's coming down the pipe, because there literally is so much. But I do agree with Frank that XDR is amazing. When you tie it to threat intelligence and add a little bit of machine learning in there where it's doing some automated response, and it saves us a lot of time, and that's the biggest thing, right? Because with the the 40,000 students that we have, doing stuff, there's compromises that happen all the time, and to have the XDR out there going and just telling us, look, somebody clicked on a link and got an infection, and we cleaned it up for you. That saves our team time, right? Going to clean it up. So it's a good thing to have for sure. And one of the things that I also want to talk about too is just the pandemic changed everything for us. Everything was on premise. All of our security technologies, everything we had was on premise, and then everybody moved to the cloud, and we discovered that we were blind to what was happening, and so we moved a lot of our management systems, our monitoring systems, out to the cloud just to see what was happening out there, and that's improved our stance quite a bit by doing that.
Very cool, Rob. You mentioned something that tweaked me. Whenever I go in and work with an organization and set up a security practice, I have a set of axioms, and one of the axioms is to radically leverage the technologies you have. Because I agree with you. In a lot of cases, we buy it and we maybe use 20% and we move on to the next one. And the idea is make a good purchase and then leverage it, like really leverage it. Yeah. Charles, how about you? Something old, something new, best technologies?
Well, you segued right into what I was going to say. I mean, I think
like we planned it.
Yeah, exactly. In the last year, probably the biggest improvement I've seen was maximizing the potential of one of our tools, which is Microsoft, right? So we moved from A3 or E3 licensing to A5 or E5 licensing, and that allowed us to utilize the full suite of Defender protections. And we went all in, right? So for all our workstations, which is huge, as Rob was saying, now that everybody's working from home, we actually had visibility and some automated response to everybody's workstations that are sitting at home rather than on our network, right? And then we also implemented Defender for Identity through that suite, and that was absolutely critical to detecting and investigating a breach that we had in April. We managed to actually, the breach actually resulted in our domain controllers being compromised, but because of what we saw in Defender for Identity, we were able to stop it before it became a ransomware incident and be able to track back the path that the intruder took, because of course they came in through sort of transient lab VMs that are reset every 15 minutes. So we had absolutely no log data, from the entry point, but we could trace the activities of them through Defender for Identity. So.
Very cool. I agree with you. I've spent some time in the EDR space. I know they've called it XDR, but endpoint detection response has come a long way. The visibility is unbelievable. Like I've never had that in my lifetime as a security professional, and makes huge difference.
And not just within your perimeter, right?
Yeah, well, at the endpoint, no matter where it goes, you want to be able to know what's going on, even down to the process level, or extract the file and drop it in a sandbox and see what did it actually do? Did it really do what we think it did? And so cool. Mark, something old, something new. What would be, what's the best security technologies that you're using?
Yeah. I always have a lot to say, so just kidding. So like a defense in depth model, is always the best approach from like your people, process, and technology perspective. And selecting a technology like for your institution to get the best bang for your buck, it needs to start with proper security architecture and understanding how your business operates, knowing your gaps, what's your threat landscape. And that's going to drive buy-in from leadership to help you with setting up the right solution. So for something old, I would say make sure everybody has like at least the next generation firewall, monitoring your perimeter and what's coming in and out. And just to add to something old there, make sure you patch. Patching is key to something old. I think patching is old now because people should just be doing it. And then for the something new, like endpoint is the cause of 70% of breaches, says EDUCAUSE in education, right? And so a focus on that endpoint detection and response capabilities is key to threat mitigation. And just like everybody else is saying, a good XDR with multi-source threat intelligence is going to be my pick. And, really we are supporting that borderless campus these days, and it needs to go past the edge. Otherwise you're blind, and when they come back on campus, they're in. And so definitely a good XDR solution is the way to go.
Excellent. I noticed there was a question, and I'll throw it out. It's a couple of us answered in there as well, but asking about data class and have you implemented data classification? And anybody want to jump in on that subject as well a little bit?
Sure, yeah, I can. So the University of Calgary, we have 4 levels of data classification, and if you search UCalgary policies, it'll take you to a website, and then just go look at data classification. It breaks it down into 4 levels, so public, private, confidential, and restricted. And then each of those has a definition of what it is. And the Privacy and Legal Office has worked hard through a committee called the Information Access Management Committee. And what that does is that drives these standards into the ethics board and how researchers operate and what they can do with the data and how they use it and what standards they need to adhere to from a technology perspective, but also a privacy and FOIA perspective, and sometimes the Health Information Act, depending on what the data is. And setting up data classification anywhere is difficult. I've tried it at other places in private as well. And really you need that leadership buy-in and understanding to how you're going to protect your data. And sometimes it can actually save money because you spend the money to protect your higher value assets and your higher value data classification. It really depends on how you do it, but you want to work with your data architects and your security architects on managing that, and make sure that you employ your partners in your organizations to help you do that, specifically privacy and legal, who really need to own that standard and to drive it home to get it past the board or wherever it needs to go to have that ratification.
There you go, the digital gospel according to Mark. That actually fits. Hey, I think I could tie that all together. So if you have any questions, throw them in, but let's do that. The digital gospel according to Mark. We have Sir Rob Milman. We have Francis, Vatican, Nadon, and King Charles. I mean, it's a royal group of people right here. I mean, let's look at them all. Yeah, that was a tough one to tie together, but I think I got close. Are there any questions from any of our viewers to any of the panelists? Feel free to pop it in there, and we will. I think we have only about a couple minutes left. But we'll hang around and see if there's any more questions.
Does that mean we're not going to get to the dreaded last question?
Maybe you can talk about it, Rob. You brought it up first.
And for people who are still around, I want to know what the last question would have been. We were going to start talking about quantum computing. Well, there's a good question in the chat. Why do you do what you do? Who wants to jump on that?
I do it because I love it. That's plain and simply the way it is. Cybersecurity is like, I don't know, it changes every single day. I get bored really easy when I do the same thing every day. And I've discovered that early in my career. I used to fix printers and patch LAN cables back early in my IT days. And now working in cybersecurity, it's just constant. You can focus on so many different things. It's just a wonderful experience, and it just keeps you interested and engaged all the time.
Yeah, it's an exciting area. Things change all the time. It's a game of cat and mouse, and of course, if you're stuck in an incident for the whole weekend, then maybe your mood changes. But it's a very exciting field, so that's why I'm in there.
It's a pretty wide range of things you need to do, right? You need to implement technical controls, but you also have to consult with faculty over, to explain to them why they need security, right? So it's definitely an interesting challenge.
Josh, you turkey. I knew he was going to ask. I just knew it. I shouldn't have mentioned the question. I shouldn't have.
Yeah.
We know that the Chinese came out about 3 or 4 months ago saying they have a quantum computer, and I think there is concern about cryptography, and all the components around that. But most of our brains melted when we started trying to really dig into this subject. So I don't know. We're none of us are cryptologists, so I think I'm not going to touch that one. I don't know if anybody wants to jump on it.
No, the only thing I could say is that the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity did a really good presentation on quantum safe cryptography, and really kind of opened my eyes up to how quickly quantum computing is actually coming at us with a new standard that's going to be approved in 2025. And so that it's just something that if you're working in cybersecurity, you need to start to pay attention to it. And like I said, look up quantum safe cryptography, and hopefully you can understand it better than the rest of us have been able to figure out so far.
Yeah, that's a good point, Robbie. Trend Micro has a good article out there on quantum and cybersecurity and how it's going to change the landscape too. If you Google that, you'll find it. But yeah, I think it should be on everybody's roadmap. Next 5 to 10 years is going to be a reality, and the NIST is working on it right now on how to defeat the challenges of quantum and the challenges it's going to present with breaking cryptography. So take a look at those sessions. They're available on the internet, and that's about all I have to add there.
Jeff threw a good question in, and Jeff, if you don't mind, I might just take a quick shot at it. He talks about 2FA and Dave class. How do you articulate proper use to non-technical people? Stick, carrot, workshops. I think all of the above. I was in a session not long ago where we understand from a sociology perspective that 20% of compliance comes from the antecedent. That is, you need to do this, or I need to do this, and 80% of the compliance comes from the consequence. So there's a consequence to the action. So it's just like when you speed, right? You can speed, and what really stops you from speeding is I really don't want to pay that ticket. But you need to focus on trying to encourage people, but there always has to be a consequence, because really that drives, from a sociology perspective, compliance in a lot of cases. I don't know, anybody else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, sure. So, the stick or the carrot, it's funny, at the University of Calgary, the way we started getting people into multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication was with offering them OneDrive, and if they got OneDrive, they got to have MFA. And then the other way we sold it is how many compromised accounts do you have per month, and then that started to drive real interest because internal phishing was happening and things like that, and it starts to drive it. But how do you articulate proper use to non-tech people in workshops? I think it just has to be like a decision needs to be made at the top, but a lot of the commercial operators out there, like Facebook, like Apple, like all of that, are doing the work for you for two-factor. And a lot of people in industry and different companies and things like that, sometimes they're like, whoa, this is too much for our users. And it's like, well, wait, I had to do this just last week when I got my new iPhone or my new Android. And it's like, well, maybe that culture shift has already happened, and it's not that big a deal, and it's not as scary as people think. And we have over 80,000 accounts on MFA now, including faculty, staff, student, alumni, and retirees. And so it is real. And for the data classification one, I think it's just you have to make it real simple, and take a look at how privacy and legal did it at our institution, and that might help. But you just keep it to simple bullets on what it means to them and what they have to do, and integrate that into your software acquisition governance. That's how you link the two together, because if somebody buys something and it's level 3, level 4 data, you have to have MFA on it. So, there's no way around that, and that drives the adoption and drives the understanding. And really, it's not about scaring anymore. It's about invoking people to care about doing this, and that, this is just the way of life now, is we want to protect our assets and we want to protect our privacy.
I can't believe, Mark, you used OneDrive as a carrot. Like, I would have pushed for chocolate or something more. But okay, it works. Anybody else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I think it's important to put it in terms that everybody understands, right? One thing we did with MFA adoption, we had, as we were sort of rolling it out to all staff, we actually had phished accounts where, because we have self-service um, for staff to manage their direct deposit, people's direct deposit was actually changed and paid out to the wrong person because they were compromised, right? So you put that message in terms for everybody, and it makes sense, right? Because I think the question often is, well, I don't have anything in my university account that I really care about. Well, your paycheck is pretty important.
I personally was involved in exactly like that, where one was redirected, and those stories. I think actually that's a really good thing. I didn't think of it. Those of us in the security space have to be reasonably good storytellers in a way that to get people's attention, right? Because and they'll remember those stories and maybe be able to see themselves in those circumstances and make it like Mark mentioned, have them care a little bit. Right? I'm vested, like I'm part of the solution, and if we tell good stories that way, maybe they want to be a part of that.
That's one of the advantages of working in higher ed too, is that we collaborate. So for us, for our MFA stuff, we just stole everything from UFC. and Mark was happy to share, right? His team told us all the stories of how what worked, what didn't work, and we copied and stole a lot of information. We modified it, of course, to make it look like SATES, but I appreciate that. That's why we're actually working together here on this panel, is because we'd all talk to each other about our problems that we have and issues and how to do things better. And
we collaborate so much that we shop at the same place for T-shirts.
yeah, obviously.
It's the support group, right? We get around and say, "Hi, I'm Kurt, and I'm an ex-security guy." Right? That's how it works. Yeah. All right. Any other questions for us from those watching? I don't know if we're past our time. If the moderator, are we good still, or?
Yeah, I think it was only 12:15. So.
Well, we did get another question. Yeah. Is cybersecurity part of IT at your organization? Quite a few companies have moved it out of the IT reporting structure. The city of Calgary has combined physical and cybersecurity into one business unit.
I report to the CIO.
Yeah. For us, we're part of IT for sure.
Yeah, we report into IT as well. But what you're talking about there is convergence, and it's a movement. It's a movement that's happening out there where you kind of have convergence of physical security and IT security. And the Edmonton Police are actually an example of a converged shop, but they still report into the CIO. So the CIO has physical security and cybersecurity underneath him, and cybersecurity and physical security report into the same director office. So it's an interesting shift, and there's a couple of good presentations out there from Gartner on convergence, and it is a real thing, but it really needs to make sense for your institution and your organization on how you do that, because they are two very different things, and it depends on where you're at from a maturity perspective in both of them as well, and that technology understanding and physical understanding. So there's some food for thought for you.
Yeah, I report to CIO as well, but it's interesting point because I was in a talk, I think with a Quebec university was presenting about how their IT security had moved around. They were outside of IT and found it just didn't work because they didn't have the consultation. They didn't have security analysts on the teams implementing security by design, right? And they actually moved back inside IT. So yeah, it's an interesting concept.
So when I get a chance to recommend this, and I would, there's a piece I'd borrow from Mark there. If the organization's mature and has a mature enterprise risk property, I actually recommend that, and let's tying this to what Charles said too, we don't want an us and them, because if you pull it out, it becomes us and them, and that's a problem. What we want is, I've seen instances, and I've personally been involved in instances where the CIO obviously doesn't want to report things up because it looks bad for them. So in a really mature organization with risk management, enterprise risk management, I've recommended where the CISO reports administratively to the CIO, but functionally to the board and a board committee around risk, which means that the CIO can't fire the CISO. In a lot of cases, that can happen. And yet the risk committee gets a really good and unbiased view of what's going on from a security function. And I noticed, Steve, you dropped something in there, and I'm going to disagree with you. I don't think IT is a function of finance. I think IT is a strategic partner that needs to be at the table. And when you put it under finance, you don't see it as strategic. You see it as a cost center. That's what it says to us, or at least to me, when I go into an organization. If it's sitting at the table and the CIO is there, then it's a strategic partner. If it's under finance, it's seen as a cost center. And that's the way I differentiate it. I don't know about you guys. What do you think?
I would tend to agree, especially in an academic institution, because I would say that finance doesn't understand what the teaching side needs, right? And that's our business, right? Supporting academics and students, right?
Angelo, who would chair the risk committee? Usually it's a board member, a member of your board of governors or a board of directors. Somebody chairs that committee, and then they have a group, and you report directly through that. So the board gets visibility, unencumbered visibility to the board. And CIOs and CFOs all cringe when they hear that because they don't want that. But that's the way. That's the way it should be, I think.
But you're right, Chris. That's the way it works for us. And I talked about I report to the CIO, but I also do quarterly report to the audit committee too at the board level too. It's just part of the way it's structured here at SAIT.
Agreed, Ken. You should never report to an internal auditor ever. If you do,
But they are our friends. Internal audit is our friends.
Yeah, audit is welcome as long as you are, a regular human and not a crazy person.
Yes.
All right. Any more questions? This is awesome. Oh, this is a lot of fun. Yeah, we should make them wear kitty ears when they come in. I knew that was floating around out there somewhere. Kitty ears. We haven't heard it in here yet, so
it's out there. that and something about a hot tub and rubber duckies.
Okay, it was all said. We're good. We've come full circle. Any more questions? All right. Well, I think we've gone well over time, but thanks for attending. We hope you enjoyed the session. Guys, it's always a pleasure to chat with you. This was fun. We should do it again.